Hey, it's Chris. Expeditions from Stonemaier Games. A sequel to Scythe. What do you need to know? Let me tell you, this is also why I don't pre-order at retail. Let's talk. Now, full disclaimer, I actually got a review copy sent to me, but that was actually after I traded for a copy because I was never told I was getting a review copy. So, very interesting turn of events there. But let me run you through my thoughts on Expeditions. Let's go. Now, first off, we have to put out the disclaimer there that although it says it's the sequel to Scythe, it's not really in any way, shape, or form, except for basically aesthetically related to Scythe. Well, you know what? The other side of things is you do have endgame scoring conditions that are similar in terms of you have to achieve a certain number of them, in this case, 4, in order to trigger the end of the game, which doesn't actually, again, trigger the end of the game. It then allows you basically to score your victory points to see who's actually won. Obviously, it's going to give you an advantage if you're the person that triggers it, but you aren't necessarily guaranteed a win. So what do you need to know about Expeditions? Brief overview of the game in a nutshell, and a little bit of everything, who it's right for, who's going to like this, who isn't going to like this, pros, cons, everything else in between. So to start off, you can see here that you have your own individual player board and you get your own little individual mech. And the mech is going to be your main method of transportation around this hex-based grid that I'll show you in a second. But this player board is very unique because you've got two things that I really like going on. The action selection mechanism represented by the cube up here, meaning that as you move this cube, you are going to be selecting your actions, but more importantly, you're also going to be selecting the actions that you do not want. If you ever have it over here in the refreshed, meaning it's basically set at 0, you get to move it to the center area, which means you get to move, play, and gather as individual actions. But then subsequently, every other turn, if it's not here, you are going to be moving it to one of these locations, meaning the only two that you get to take are the ones that are not covered up. And so that creates some very interesting choices and dilemmas as you go across and as you try and choose which two of these three are going to be optimal, because refreshing is going to basically reset your turn and allow you to get all 3 on the next one, but it's also going to slow you down, and choosing when to do so, a la pit stops in racing, is going to be very important. Then you have the aforementioned 4 victory stars. You get the 4 victory conditions met, you get to place one of these on each of them, and that triggers the end game. And then you have 2 resources over here that you're going to be keeping track of that are going to allow you to essentially remove corruption from tiles in order, again, to score victory points as well as achieve these star conditions. The other sides of the board that you need to be aware of, well, you have quests that you can fill up to 4, you have items that you can store up to 4, and you have meteorites down here that you can meld up to 4, all as individual different actions that you'll be achieving across the board. Here's an example of the card-driven gameplay that this is really based on. And you'll see that I have a meteorite card, an item card, and a quest card, all indicated by the space in the upper right-hand corner here to distinguish them. Now, all 3 of these are going to be able to slot it around that board that I just mentioned if you achieve the special action that allows you to do so. Otherwise, this card-driven game is really a Tableau builder with a slight bit of worker placement down here as an extra optimization. And it's very interesting because you're going to be getting resources up here based on playing them in your Tableau. You get additional resources if you meet additional requirements. You also get additional resources or benefits if you can place workers that match the color indicated on the bottom of the card. Similarly, as well as instant benefits there above the worker, but then also quest cards, which again give you benefits, give you the requirements over here on the side that you need to achieve or the benefits that you may need to get, but then also the location of the tile that you'll see that is going to be based on the board itself that you have to accomplish it on. And this game comes with a very, very, very large deck of these cards. As you can see here, this is just absolutely sprawling. This is Ark Nova-esque size in terms of deck, asymmetry, and just, you know, fantastic artwork. Let's be frank here. This is really, really freaking cool. And I love that. That's probably one of my biggest aesthetic pluses as a whole in anything I've seen in the last year or two game-wise. So let's go back to the actual mechanisms though. The 3 main things, as I showed you on the player board, are really rather straightforward and simple, even though this rule book from Stonemaier always has more of a tell rather than a show feel. What I mean by that is the rule book sort of lays out every single individual thing and then tells you afterwards this is what you're actually doing. And it's probably one of the biggest faults I have with their games in a nutshell is they're written more like technical documents sometimes rather than explaining to you gently, holding your hand, walking you through how to play it and learning it in that sense. And that's not just isolated to them, though. That seems to be more of an issue with our industry as a whole. It's a side tangent. But essentially what you're doing is you're moving. You're moving from tile to tile, hex-based grids that are adjacent to each other in any way. If you explore or end up on one that's not turned over already, you grab the little map token, you disrupt the whole board, and you flip it over, and you have to end your movement there. The second action that you're going to be taking is just getting resources that are going to be present on the bottom. And all of these are relatively straightforward. As you saw on the player card, these are your 2 resources, so I get one of each of these here. However, I cannot yet get this star because as you flip these over here, you'll notice that I also have this nice bag of corruption, essentially. And what it tells you is this has a 5+ on it, meaning I have to draw tokens from this bag until they are equal to or greater than a total of 5. So green 3, I place that over the top. We're not over 5 yet. Then I draw another one. Oh, just kidding. We drew the 20. We won't draw that right now because that's a special endgame victory condition. But let's say the next one is 5. So now 5 plus 3 is 8. 5 plus 3 is 8. So that 8 is greater than 5. So then that happens there. Now that is one of the special actions that you're going to be having to use in order to get rid of those corruption tokens, because the more you gather of these, no matter what the value is, they're going to be worth money, which is the victory point scoring at the end. And that's one of the things that you're going to be optimizing, along with the quests as well as the meteorites, which are going to be a sort of different way of getting those as you build up your tableau. And now the tableau is going to be something separate we'll talk about in a minute. Now let's talk about, though, the third action before we go any further. Let's talk about the play action. And the play action is really driven by those cards again, because you're going to have various spots on the board in cases of these that are going to either allow you to take one of the face-up cards in between these junctions, or you're going to be able to draw them from the deck and be able to choose potentially which one more behooves you. And so as you flip these over, you're going to have more access to more different options in terms of what you can utilize, how you can upgrade things, or just things that are going to be in combination of how you want to manage your tableau as a whole. Not only getting access to them, but also gathering them and combo driven, really tableau building as a whole. But it's a mix of worker placement there, but the workers are really more resource management because they're just getting you extra. They're not actually something that's going to solely activate the card in the first place like a typical worker placement might be. Now here is that endgame scoring tracker, right? It gives you the requirements for everything that you need, and there are potentially 7, although this 7th one gives you an option of either or, but still can only score once, of the 4 that you're going to need to fulfill. So that is the very other reminiscent thing of Scythe apart from the aesthetic. It gives you the setup here, it shows you how to do, you're always going to have souths and then centrals and then norths, and then it gives you other ways that you're going to be scoring points here at the end. And you're just going to keep track, and you're going to place your little star markers here and here and here as you achieve them until somebody gets 4 placed up there. So like I said, with those cards, you're going to be solving quests, you're going to be melding meteorites, or you're going to be upgrading your items to give you more permanent abilities. Because if we pull out one of these item cards here for a second, you can see that the item cards not only give you a benefit down here at the bottom, but that you also get the immediate benefit. But this matters because as you play those cards on that play action, essentially what you're doing is you're creating a tableau that just goes from left to right as you play them. And so you have to subsequently play, but you can refresh or gather them back up into your hand to be able to have a more chance at playing them later in a maybe better combo system, or you get to play them again to get the bonuses that are going to be down here or available to you, or the bonuses up here that you get for playing them in the first place. The item upgrade, for example, actually just allows you to tuck this so that this item benefit down here is only showing at all times, and it automatically happens no matter if you need to place a worker there or not. It's just automatically a passive income then, essentially, as you go along. And so how you want to optimize your passives are great. Same thing along the lines with the meteorites. The meteorites do the same thing, except you just flip them this way, and then you get $1 per 4 value corruption. And so then you're going to have abilities and ways to mitigate and to gather more resources or victory points that way. And they also have the same over here that you can place another worker. And again, similarly with quests, they give you the requirements and then they give you the worker placement spot. But the real benefit is having the tableau there and really being clever in how you order, how you play those cards, so that you maybe get the worker that you need before you play the one with the blue, so that you get the blue worker by the time you play this one, so you can get the double benefit of it in the first place. Or deciding to meld the meteorite at the right time after you've already taken the significant benefit it gives you down here and maximized it, so that then and only then are you going to take this benefit. That's really the game in a nutshell. There's not much more to it than that. You're gently flipping over tiles, you're playing this tableau, picking them back up, placing your workers off to the side, playing the tableau again, placing your workers out, eventually upgrading your cards to the sides of the boards that they correspond to, drawing more to rinse and repeat, and maybe even rearranging them as your strategy evolves. So, pros and cons, let's go right into it. Look, when you've got this variable hex-based setup, it seems very nice. This is going to be a mixed one, though, a pro and a con here at the very beginning. Because the south are always at the south, the central are always in the central, the north are always at the north, it does get a little bit samey. There is no other variable setup, right? This is the hex-based setup that you do, period. And it'd be nice to have a little bit of a mix. It'd be nice to have a little bit of variety. It'd be nice to have just something else of tiles that you're not going to see every single time. Yeah, it's going to be a slightly different experience, but when you can move your mech 1, 2, 3 spaces, you can get to a vast majority of the same spaces in the same turns, even with completely different setups. And so it doesn't maximize the variability in that sense as much as I would like. I mean, we'll go with the obvious pro here next as well. It's very nice production. The miniatures are fantastic. The tiles and the hexes are actually awesome in terms of readability and usability and just iconography. It really works from that aspect. I like the starting characters asymmetry as you go along as part of your Tableau building system. You get your own individual unique character and companion. And they're nice, and they really play to the strategy to allow you to develop it, but also allow you to just sort of change up along the way and don't necessarily shoehorn you into doing just one sole thing. The other thing I mentioned, I really like this little action Tableau management system. Can't do the move, got to do the play and the gather. Move over here, now I get the move and the play. Now I have to really be careful when I time my refresh because I need to pick up all my cards now, and then I can get all 3. And how I manage that timing-wise. And when do you wait until all your cards are down? And when do you wait until you just get halfway through and you go, oh crap, I need to revisit and, just kind of redo my plan all accordingly. I really like this. Pick one and don't get it because it just works. These resources, they're okay. I mean, it's not bad. And you know what? This triggering of the endgame, well, we'll talk about that in a second because not as big a fan of the stars as a whole, but we'll get there. And again, I actually do not mind having this large freaking deck of cards. I like the asymmetry. I like that none of these are duplicative. I love the fact that there's just some crazy stuff going on here. And I don't mind having a large deck of randomness, folks. I don't. It's not necessarily a con for me, but it might be for you. I mean, that's the big con with, say, games like Earth and Arc Nova. And that's the big issue, right? Is you might be looking for certain cards in here that are going to give you a better combo, and you're just not going to be able to get them by how large this is. One of the small things that is also a blessing with this hex-based system here, with these cards in between, is that you actually have an action that allows you to just sort of trash these and get rid of them so you can recycle through, because some games don't allow you to do that in the market sense as well. So that's a boon as well. The one-shot abilities of these cards, the Tableau system as a whole, is really kind of clever, and I like how it works together and how you're choosing or making your choices to make sure that this is the most optimal puzzle in a slightly Res Arcana-esque adjacent way. Now, it's not that, but it gives me vibes of that, and I can see why people enjoy this system as a whole, and I do too. Cons. What might you not like? Like I said, the turn play is actually relatively straightforward, right? You move your little token, you choose those 2 actions, you do those 2 actions, which are really quick, and then the next person goes. And yet, at the same time, this game felt like it dragged, especially at higher player counts. The game just requires a lot more precision in the analysis paralysis as well because of so many cards, because of so many options. You have the real potential to have this just overstay its welcome. It's probably also about 30% bigger than it needs to be on the table from a production standpoint. I mean, it makes these hexes really easy to read, but it makes it a table hog. It doesn't give you a whole lot of variability with this hex-based system, especially since you're using all the tiles all the time. Now, if you couldn't move as far, if you couldn't get where you needed to more routinely, if there were issues from that standpoint, it might be more of an issue that I was okay with. I mean, again, it's going to be a blessing curse of having these spots in the middle where you're just not going to have the card you want, or you're not going to draw the card from the deck you want. It's going to cause you to pivot, and if you're not pivoting, you're going to fall behind very quickly. And again, the other blessing curse of this is with this scoring here at the end, with all of these being the trigger, I mean, it works. At the same time, it's just like Scythe. It's a little bit anticlimactic because once that fourth one happens, well, everybody else gets one turn and that's it. And it's not even a guarantee that you actually get the same amount of turns because the person who triggers it gets one last turn as well. There's also not a whole lot of player interaction. If you're going into this saying, this is going to be Scythe and we are going to go head to, we are going to build, no, you're not going to do either of those. And again, that's why I say it's not really anything like Scythe in that sense. The X side of things is there in some ways, but it's also not. So this is maybe, if you want to call it a spiritual successor, sure. But, you know, to say that this is the sequel, again, going back to the beginning of the video, except for how the end game is triggered and really the aesthetic, the similarities sort of end there for me. Which again, isn't a bad thing because I didn't like Scythe a whole lot to begin with. So this was more of a curiosity rather than a turnoff for me. The other thing that can be a little anticlimactic is when you get on your strategy to winning, when you take your path to victory, the exploration side of things can sort of fizzle off. If you've got the ones up that you need that are going to be having these resources or these actions that are going to best fit your dynamic strategy, you don't really need to go elsewhere. You don't have the need to flip over the rest of the tiles. You can min-max to your greatest extent, and it behooves you to do that. It actually is going to be a detriment if you go further exploring to unknowns rather than let other people do it for you, potentially. And similarly, the quests sort of are, again, a little anticlimactic. It's kind of just go there and play the card, you know, kind of have the general resources, but they're very samey, and there's not a whole lot of other dynamic there that I wish could have been there in the first place with the ability for questing in the, you know, crux of this game. The itemization is nice. The meteorite explanation, again, it's a little bit tricky. The which ones are going to be more valuable, it's not going to be easily impressed upon you in the first game that you play, or two even. You're going to have to take some time to understand how those parts are interconnected, which again sort of leads to this game being a little bit slower burning and longer and overstaying its welcome as a whole, because some of the interaction isn't there. Some of the variability, the chaos isn't there either. So if you're a little bit analysis paralysis prone, it could easily be triggered as this game progresses, looking at what's out there, even though the actual physical turns, like I said before, are relatively straightforward, sort of paradoxical in that sense, which is not what I was hoping for. If this game was 75 minutes or 90 minutes max at like a 3-4 player count, I think I could overlook some of those deficits. But when this game approaches a 2+ hour mark doing the same rote repetition, you know, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, right? Too much of a good thing. And I think that ultimately is where I would put this. This is a good game. This is a very solid, enjoyable game with the mechanisms that they've got individually with the card-driven gameplay, the Tableau system, as well as the management of those actions. But I can only do good things so many times before it feels like it's grinding, rather than I feel like I'm truly achieving. As an engine builder, it doesn't really feel like you're getting fully engaged in the engine until you're at least halfway through the game. Plus, because those turns are so quick, because they're so decisive in terms of the basically two actions you're taking, the meaningful progress on a turn by turn basis is measured in baby steps rather than accomplishment or the feeling of accomplishment. And so by the time you actually get to that full feeling, the game is going to be a race, but it's also probably going to be near the end of the race rather than feeling like you have an engine that has been building the whole time and making meaningful strides. And again, the corruption that goes onto the tiles, that's probably another con when you're placing these down and summing them up like I did. It's a clever, unique, dynamic system that the rest of these elements are, occasionally lacking with some of the explorations and the quests. Just, it felt like a few of those things needed just a little more oomph, like the corruption twist there, rather than what we got necessarily. So where does that leave me in my thoughts at this point? Well, I like it, but that's probably all I can say at this point. I think this game is built well in terms of its foundation, core mechanisms that it is relying on. At the same time, like I mentioned, a few of them in terms of the exploration, the modularity, the variability are just as well not really fully utilized or fully achieving their potential that I felt like it could have been at the same time. Along with the longer playing time at even a minimally increased player count, I dare say it does feel like it overstays its welcome when you're grinding through the repetition of a good thing. So is it going to leave my collection at this point? Probably not, because again, they've already announced an expansion. And so I kind of want to see what that does to maybe streamline, to maybe navigate, to maybe create new paths or variability. But at the same time, if it just replaces one for another, sort of like Wonderland's War is doing with one of their decks with their expansion as the first expansion, it doesn't change the dynamic. It gives you a slight twist of things. That's not going to be enough for me to want to keep it when I have so many other things that I feel so much more engaged with in a shorter time and have a greater dynamic feeling of enjoyment. So it's on the trade list, but it's not necessarily going anywhere depending on what else it holds. And at the same time, I hate saying that because I hate looking at an expansion and going, I need this expansion to fix my issues with the base game. It can improve some of the issues with the base game, but to fix them always feels weird, especially when we didn't even talk about the elephant in the room. When you're talking, the non-deluxified version for this game is essentially going for like $70. Because again, I'd say that the production is top notch, but it's also, like I mentioned earlier, about 30% larger in some of these things like the boards and the hexes. I mean, yeah, it makes it very, very table presence wise to look at. Nice. But, I just look at this and go, this is a $40 game that then if you said an expansion is going to cost you additional $20, okay, now you're bordering $100 for a game that's going to take me 2+ hours with 3 people needing the expansion for that whole bundle to work. And that nowadays is a pill that I have a hard time swallowing. So that's why I have mixed feelings on it, and that's why it will be on the trade list. So I can't tell you that if someone offers me something really, really interesting for it, I won't get rid of it. But I'm also not necessarily looking to get rid of it either, because it is an enjoyable play overall, self-contained in small doses. So there you go. Expeditions, my thoughts, my concerns, my pros, my cons, everything else in between. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day.